Albert, the cheater, tried to reconcile with me. He cautiously approached, probing. I did my best to avoid him. His eyes were bloodshot, looking completely broken. Chapter 1. I lay on my side in bed, about to fall asleep. Albert hugged me from behind, startling me awake. He held me tightly, with all my strength. I pried his fingers open one by one and freed myself from his embrace. He pounded the bed with his fists. You still won't forgive me? You are my wife. My wife, I said. What does being your wife mean to you? After a pause, I added, you should go to her. With that, I got out of bed, grabbed my pillow, and went to the guest room. He sobbed loudly and soon slammed the door on his way out. I lay in bed, calming my anger. 3 months ago, I discovered his infidelity and asked for a divorce. He admitted his mistake, knelt down, and begged for forgiveness, swearing it would never happen again. I was relentless and insisted on the separation. He screamed, eyes wide with fury, declaring he would never divorce me. He even brought in my mother and our son. My mother clutched her heart, saying if I divorced, her heart condition would kill her, that she would surely die. She said she couldn't bear her daughter getting a divorce. My son didn't oppose our separation, but he silently went to school and came home, having 5 fevers in a month. In my heart, Albert was already dead, but I couldn't let anything happen to my mother or my son. I allowed him to stay in the house as a son-in-law and father, but he was no longer my husband. He cried and fussed, insisting he was my husband, asking if not him, who else could he be? I didn't care who he was. I didn't speak to him, nor did I let him touch me. He was angry. He raged, acting more like the victim than I, the actual one. After 2 months, he realized I was serious. He lashed out at me. You're my wife. It's natural for us to sleep together. If you won't let me touch you, I'll make you. He tried to tear my clothes off. I pushed him away and ran outside to call the police. The police treated it as a domestic dispute. They also gave me their contact information, so I could call them anytime. Albert was scared and never used force on me again, but he kept trying to test the waters, never getting any chance from me. I am a clear-headed, rational person. There is no possibility of us being together again. Chapter 2. My mom came to see me again. She asked, worried and guilty, still not working? Still can't accept Albert? My lack of intimacy with Albert worried her greatly. She went to the hospital and made an appointment with a psychologist. The doctor told her not to force me, saying I was in a state of trauma and pushing me too hard might drive me insane. Only then did my mom realize the severity of the situation. But she is not someone who can bear the burden. She hopes the storm will pass quickly, and our family will return to its former harmony, with Albert and me as loving as before. But how could that be possible? I looked at my mom and sighed. Mom, you should get your heart checked. She used her heart condition to threaten me into compromising, and I did. But I also reminded her to take care of herself because I would not compromise a second time. I had already begun to mentally prepare myself for the possibility of losing my mother. My coldness angered her. She yelled, "Are you trying to drive your mom to death? Why are you so stubborn? Many men are like this. Why aren't other women acting like you?" She cursed me while shoving me. I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of indescribable misery wash over me. I wanted to retort, "If you want to be that kind of woman, you be it." I won't. But I couldn't say it. Her face turned pale, showing signs of an impending heart attack, successfully deterring me from confronting her. At this moment, my son heard the commotion and came out of his room. He said to my mom, "Grandma, can you stop yelling at my mom? You might not care about this daughter, but I don't want to lose my mom." My mom's face immediately turned grim. I walked over, hugged my son, and tears rolled down my cheeks. Since giving up the divorce for her sake, I've felt like dying from sorrow, but filial piety suppressed me, and the fear of death prevented me from yelling at her. Chapter 3. My son contacted my dad, and he took my mom away. My son threw himself into my arms. "Mom, if you're really suffering, just get a divorce." Although I'm a bit scared of being a child from a single-parent family, I'm more afraid of losing you. I hugged him tightly and gently said, "No, son. You won't be a child from a single-parent family. And you won't lose me. Mom just needs some time." My son immediately brightened up. After that day, Albert disappeared for a while. Whether he was on a business trip or with that woman, I didn't care. His absence brought me relief. I could eat and sleep well through the night. When I first found out about his infidelity, I didn't cry or make a scene, nor did I confront him. I fell into self-doubt. I wondered if it was my fault. I thought I must have done something wrong to make him seek out another woman. I reflected on all my actions since we met, but I couldn't pinpoint anything wrong or any mistakes I made. From the moment we met, I had given my all, treating him and his family with utmost sincerity. I intended to be with him for life, so I gave everything without reservation. The more I thought about it, the less I understood. The less I understood, the more I ruminated. I was caught in an endless loop. White hairs started to appear. Sleepless nights piled up. Until one day, my son was building a complex structure, using blocks to construct a building. Everything went smoothly at first, but he struggled to finish the roof. He muttered to himself, "I'm so good. Why aren't you cooperating, little blocks?" Hearing this, I suddenly had an epiphany. Yes, I'm so good. Why isn't he cooperating to build this family with me? How could he cheat? But what does his cheating have to do with me? Whether he cheats or not, I am still me. I am still good. Once I realized this, all the self-blame, sadness, and guilt vanished. Towards him, all that was left was disdain, because I am a treasure, and he is trash. So, I laid out all the evidence of his infidelity and asked for a divorce. Albert was dumbfounded. He was tying his tie, repeatedly combing his hair, and checking his reflection in the mirror. He said he had a social engagement that night. I knew he was grooming himself for that woman. When he saw the photos, his hands shook like a Parkinson's patient. His face fell, and he lost all his color. He was just as shocked to learn that I had known for a while as I was to learn of his cheating. Once he realized what was happening, he immediately took action. In front of me, he blocked that woman on all communication apps, cutting off all contact with her. He transferred all the money in his accounts to me, cutting off the financial support for his affair. Then, he knelt down, crying and begging for forgiveness. He swore to the heavens that he would never make this mistake again in his life. But I just watched his actions coldly. No crying, no shouting. This only made him more desperate. He knew I was serious. He didn't know that before laying my cards on the table, I had already processed all my negative emotions. He hoped I would resent him, hate him, hit him, or curse him, because that would mean I still had feelings for him. But I didn't, and that truly made him panic. What followed were various attempts to salvage the situation, but I never wavered, until he involved my mom, and my son's fevers expressed his worry and pain. Only then did my attitude slightly soften. I told him, "I won't divorce you for now. You can still be a father in this house and appear as a son-in-law in front of my mom, but you will no longer be my husband." He was overjoyed, thinking I had forgiven him. He said that my refusal to let him be my husband was just because I still held a grudge. Sooner or later, he believed I would accept him again, but it wasn't long before he realized I was serious. Now it was his turn to fall into an endless loop of unresolved emotions. He hated me for ignoring him, yet he desperately begged for my attention. Chapter 4. Albert came back. He looked at me coldly. "I've been staying at work these past few days. Aren't you disappointed? I didn't just let myself go. I'm a person, not an animal. I didn't go to that woman, nor did I go to any other woman, nor did I pay for it. I just made one mistake. You can't belittle me. I was working on an important report." No matter what he said, I didn't respond. His anger flared up. He walked behind me, trying to see what I was writing. Before he could see clearly, he yelled, "Do you have another man out there? Are you chatting with him?" When he saw what I was writing, his face turned awkward. "Oh, you're working overtime." I put down my mouse and turned to him. "Because you are like that. You assume others are like you. But if you conducted yourself the way I do, You wouldn't accuse me of infidelity." His face turned pale, and he muttered, "Do I have a problem with how I conduct myself?" I was speechless. He went to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist told him that his thoughts and emotions were currently chaotic, making it hard for him to handle problems rationally, and that he was prone to making mistakes. He recommended medication and regular counseling. He ran back to tell me, "It turns out I'm sick. I have depression. That's why I made a mistake. I'm not really like that. You're a doctor. You can't hold a patient accountable." He thought he had finally found a legitimate reason for me to forgive him, a reason that would allow me to let it go. But I said, "Many people diagnosed with depression only harm themselves, not others. And you, who did you harm?" The light immediately left his eyes, and he hugged his head, crying, "In your heart, I'm just an animal, aren't I?" He looked at me with hope, hoping I would contradict him. If I contradicted him, it would mean I didn't want to hurt him. But I didn't contradict him. I withdrew all my kindness from him. Not outright calling him an animal was already a great mercy. Chapter 5. It's understandable that Albert is reluctant to let me go. We have comparable educational backgrounds, matching talents and looks, and decent family backgrounds. I have no issues with my character. Marrying me brought him many benefits. He gained respect outside and peace and contentment at home. Since our marriage, his parents' health has stabilized. I am a doctor, and he is a company owner. He can make money, but I provide social resources he cannot access. The connections I can mobilize to help this family are beyond his imagination. I am devoted to marriage. He has met many women but never encountered anyone like me, who has no other intentions once married. So, divorcing me isn't just like cutting out his heart. It's a loss in every aspect. He realizes this, which is why he's desperately trying to win me back. But I am unwilling. Without him, I lose nothing substantial. I earn a lot on my own. My expenses are low, and with my income, I can easily raise our son. Without him, I am not significantly impacted. However, I am held back by illness. My mom has a heart condition, and my son frequently gets fevers. I'm not afraid of divorce, but I fear they might harm themselves because of it. But this won't last forever. My mom will grow old, and my son will grow up. I might not divorce him for now, but eventually, I will. I'm not afraid of divorce. I look forward to it. Albert, on the other hand, has too much to lose. He's not stupid. He's a businessman who calculates profit and loss. Chapter 6. But he doesn't realize that whether he divorces or not, the losses are inevitable. I no longer care for him or look after him. One day, he said he had a stomachache. In the past, I would get him the right medication and schedule a checkup. At our hospital, it was easy to get him seen by a doctor. He had never experienced the difficulty of getting medical care. But this time, I just told him to go see a doctor. Then I grabbed my bag and left. Before, whenever he was home, no matter how busy I was, I would cook, always paying attention to nutritional balance. I adjusted meals according to his needs. But after I stopped caring for him, even when he was home, I only cooked based on my and my son's needs. He often sat with chopsticks in hand, looking at the food that wasn't meant for him, feeling embarrassed. Before, I would tell him about our son's situation. Now, I don't mention a word about how our son is doing at school or at home. When the teacher posted our son's award certificate and photos of his performance in the group chat, he found out that our son could jump rope and even do tricks. In this home, even if he stubbornly stays, he no longer has a significant place. Realizing this, he cried until he fainted. I sat and watched. It was our son who called the ambulance. After his parents learned about our impending divorce, they both ended up in the hospital. I didn't arrange their care or visit them. In the past, whenever they were sick, I not only arranged everything but also took care of them personally. From now on, it's all his responsibility. When Albert woke up, he dragged himself around, exhausted and overwhelmed. After his parents were discharged from the hospital, our son said to Albert, "Dad, you should separate from Mom. If you stay together like this, everyone is unhappy. I don't want to lose Mom." and I don't want to lose Grandpa and Grandma either. He hugged our son and almost cried himself to death. He finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. His actions had hurt everyone connected to him. His parents were too ashamed to approach me. They weren't bad people. They just raised an unreliable son. They called me to apologize, only asking if they could see their grandson regularly. I agreed. I wouldn't deprive my son of any family ties. But if my son didn't want to see them, I would never force him. Chapter 7. When my mom heard about the attitude of Albert's parents, her stance began to soften as well. If even the man's side had given up hope, what was the woman still holding on to? She cared a lot about Face. I took the opportunity to explain in detail what Albert had done. She looked incredulous. When I told her that Albert had gone out to meet that woman while our child was sick, my mom almost couldn't breathe. I gave her some medication, and after she had calmed down, I continued to persuade her. I said, "Mom, you are a wise mother. I've always been grateful to you." She gave me a reproachful look, but her expression softened a lot. I hugged her and acted spoiled. Since I became an adult, I had rarely done this. She was a bit unaccustomed to it, but soon she showed the smile of a loving mother. Seeing her mood improve, I shared my perspective. I said, "Mom, I love art, but you made me study medicine. You said that the older a doctor gets, the more valuable they become, and that a woman should be able to support herself throughout her life. I listened to you, and now I have a high income. So many people respect me and come to me for medical advice. It fills me with confidence, and it's all thanks to you." My mom listened and showed a proud expression. "That's right. Who am I? I'm your mother." I seized the moment to add, "Mom, you are wise, but your wisdom works on ordinary people. When it comes to complicated people, it doesn't work as well." Albert sought out another woman behind my back while pretending to be a good son-in-law in front of you. He successfully deceived you. My mom's face darkened, but she accepted it calmly. She said, "Yes. How could he be like that?" I said, "What he is doesn't matter. What matters is what we are. I don't lack money or love. I don't need to beg him for either. So naturally, I don't need to suffer his torment." My mom hesitated for a long time before finally saying, "But if you get divorced, your father and I live here, and the neighbors will gossip about us. I won't be able to show my face. Everyone used to envy how well I raised you and how well you married. Now, if you get divorced, people will say, 'She said she raised her well, but she couldn't even keep a man.' I won't be able to hold my head up." I said, "Mom, once I'm divorced, you and Dad can come live with me and be my strong support." My mom's eyes lit up. "Yes. Why didn't I think of that? If you get divorced, of course, we'll live with you. What am I staying here for? I'm an only child, and my parents had planned to live with me after I got married. But Albert's family, being from the countryside, couldn't accept parents living with their daughter. After marrying Albert, to respect his parents' feelings and to make it convenient for them to visit, my parents continued to live in their old house. Whenever they came to see me, they made the trip in one day. She loved and understood me. Now, I told her that divorce wasn't all bad. At least we could live together. She didn't have any more heart problems and shouted, "Old man, our daughter is getting divorced. We need to help her and live with her." My dad, who had been eavesdropping from the bedroom, was so excited when he heard my mom shout that he started packing immediately. Albert and I divorced smoothly. Our son stayed with me. We had 2 houses. The larger one was mine, and the smaller one was his. All our savings were put in our son's name. The company went to him. I didn't take advantage of him, and he was very grateful for that. But he also started to have inappropriate thoughts about me again. Facing his passionate gaze, I coldly said, in my heart, "I wish you had nothing, but you are Ben's father. If you don't do well, he will worry, and I don't want Ben to worry. Focus on your career and leave a good inheritance for Ben when you die." He nodded, choking back tears. Chapter 8. Before he moved out, he was still not giving up. He said firmly, "I will wait for the day you come to your senses. I am confident we will remarry. We are just temporarily apart. no matter how passionately he displayed his feelings. I just crossed my arms defensively. From start to finish, I made no effort to keep him. He sighed and left. The house has 3 bedrooms. The same day Albert moved out, my parents moved in. We kept their old house, but most of the time, they stayed with me. We had bought this house because of its convenience. It's a 15-minute walk to a top-tier hospital. There are a dozen malls nearby. Across the street from the community are elementary, middle, and high schools. Just outside the west gate of the community is a park. My dad was delighted after living here for less than a week. He went to the park 5 or 6 times a day. He made many new friends. My mom went shopping every day. This place has not only malls but also various small shops and a wholesale market. She was happier than my dad, always comparing prices. My son was my main concern. After the divorce, I immediately spoke with his homeroom teacher. The teacher assured me that none of the classmates would bring up these matters, and I felt relieved. They are in an advanced middle school class, where the students are too busy with their studies to worry about anything else. I felt reassured. As a result, my son's mood was very stable. Before, I was too busy, and his father was rarely home, so he often had to order takeout. Now, with his grandparents around, he had regular, well-prepared meals. When he made mistakes, I used to criticize him, whether he liked it or not. Now, as soon as I started to speak, his grandparents would jump in to criticize me instead. He enjoyed the benefits of having grandparents around. And then there was his father. Before the divorce, his father didn't care much about his matters and left everything to me. After the divorce, fearing he would lose his son's affection, he clearly showed more concern for him. He would check immediately whenever the teacher sent anything. My son said, "If I had known Dad would change so much after the divorce, I would have urged you to do it sooner." I couldn't help but laugh and cry when I heard this. My dad said, "The boy is right." My mom nodded in agreement. Everything was moving in a better direction. Not only did my personal life improve, but so did my career. With my parents as a strong and unwavering support system, I had more time to dedicate to my work. Besides seeing patients, I took on several research projects. I was overwhelmed, so the hospital assigned me 2 students. Our hospital is affiliated with a medical university. These 2 students were exceptionally capable and helped me a lot. In return, I provided them with many opportunities. Not only did their income increase, but I also entrusted them with important aspects of the projects, guiding them through the process. Their growth was rapid. Their advisor, Baron, noticed this and took it to heart. One day, Baron approached me, pushing his luck, asking if I could take on more students. I told him I was too busy and didn't have the energy, so I refused. But he was persistent and came back several times. I thought he was quite stubborn, so I sincerely confided in him. I have elderly parents, a mother with poor health, and a son preparing for his high school entrance exams. I need to be available for them, so I can't be too committed to work. I need to leave some room for myself. I can't overextend. He asked, "What about your husband? Can't he help you?" I gave a wry smile. "I don't have a husband. I'm divorced." He was taken aback and quickly apologized. That day, he didn't press further and left soon after. But before he left, he said, "I'm also single. I'm divorced too." I found it quite puzzling. Later, I understood his intentions. He asked the deputy director to introduce him to me. The deputy director was his master's advisor. He was also the advisor for the PhD program I was applying for. Initially, the deputy director didn't think highly of me. He felt that at almost 40, with many family responsibilities and work, I wouldn't be able to complete the PhD program on time. But after knowing that Baron wanted to pursue me, he immediately agreed. He said, "Baron doesn't have big ambitions. He just wants a simple life and is a family-oriented man. With him as your support, I believe you can complete your PhD." I originally wanted to refuse, but since the matter had become significant, I sought my parents' advice. When my mom heard the news, she beamed with joy. She said, "I've always hoped you could get a PhD when you graduated with your master's. I wished you could continue studying, But my friends all warned me that it would be hard for a woman with a PhD to find a partner. So I let you start working now that you have a child. What's there to worry about? Go for it. Or better yet, get remarried. My dad said. Give it another try. As you get older, you need a companion. Look at me now. I can't be away from your mom for a moment. I believed my dad's words. Since they moved in, I've seen how much they care for each other. I also asked my son for his opinion. When he heard that the man's last name was Lin, he immediately agreed. He said it was great. Just wonderful. I was surprised at how happy he was about getting a stepfather. My son explained. If my stepdad's last name is Lin, then no one will know if my surname Lin comes from my biological dad or my stepdad. He sincerely said, Mom, I want a dad. Even a stepdad is fine. His eyes were full of hope. So, I agreed to give Baron a chance. Chapter 9. Baron turned out to be just as the deputy director described. He truly was content with his current life. As a counselor, his position was lower than that of the research and teaching staff at the university, but he was happy with his job. He pursued an administrative career path and, after achieving an associate senior title, he didn't strive for more. He neither competed nor pushed himself hard. Aside from seeking opportunities for students from poor backgrounds, he never asked for favors. His ex-wife left him because of this. They were married for 10 years and had a son together. Before they married, he had a master's degree, and she had a bachelor's. After their marriage, she not only completed her PhD, but also secured an opportunity to study abroad. Baron could have kept up with her if he had tried harder, but he really didn't want to push himself. He felt life was good as it was. His ex-wife couldn't stand his lack of ambition and insisted on divorcing him, taking their son abroad. All these years, he had been alone in the country, never considering finding another partner. Until he met me, he said I made him want to get married again, even more than the first time. He was very good with words. He made me feel very happy. I told him I was an ambitious person, and although I was younger than him, I was currently striving for a full professorship. He earnestly said, Does it matter to you? If it does, I'll also aim for a full professorship. I could even strive for an administrative position if needed. I asked him, Do you regret it? If you had been willing to strive harder in your last marriage, maybe your family would still be intact. He said, It's different. You are ambitious, but don't look down on those who aren't. My ex-wife couldn't stand my lack of ambition and completely looked down on me. Being around her made me constantly anxious and tense. He said, You don't make me anxious or fearful. I'm willing to follow you. I laughed. Being an associate professor is just fine. I really meant it. The higher you climb, the harder it gets. If you don't want it, there's no need to force yourself. So, we established our relationship. Middle-aged love is different from that of the young. A week after establishing our relationship, we became intimate. He wanted it, and so did I. He had been alone for too long, suddenly ignited with passion, unable to resist. I had always enjoyed being intimate with Albert, and I still liked it. Though Baron and I didn't have a deep emotional foundation, our sincere affection and the physical pleasure we brought each other surpassed that with our ex-partners. After overcoming this physical barrier, Baron was overjoyed. He said that if we didn't find any major personality conflicts within 6 months, we should get married. I thought it was a good idea too. 3 months later, I brought him home to meet my family. My mom's eyes lit up when she saw him, and she treated him warmly. My dad, upon hearing that Baron enjoyed chess and practiced Bajuanjin, felt like he had found a kindred spirit. My son was delighted to discover that Uncle Lin not only had the same last name but also looked very similar to his dad. Seeing him, he immediately felt a sense of closeness. People often prefer a certain type. Baron and Albert looked alike. To be precise, they weren't just similar, but shared the same type, tall and handsome. I liked that type. A year after we met, we got married. Chapter 10. During our courtship, only my PhD advisor and my family knew about our relationship. After we got married, Baron was so happy that he posted our marriage certificate on social media. I laughed at him for being childish, saying happiness should be kept to oneself. He said he didn't know why, but he just wanted to show off to the world. I reminded him to be cautious, as this might invite trouble. He said it wouldn't, as he hadn't wronged anyone. Having been single for so many years, he believed his friends, colleagues, and even students would only be happy for him. That night, however, he was proven wrong. His ex-wife called from overseas, asking what he meant by remarrying. He was baffled by her questioning. He said, "We've been divorced for so many years, and you've been remarried for years. How does my remarriage bother you?" His ex-wife, sensing her loss of composure, still expressed her concern. She said, "With the cost of housing in Beijing being so high, who will you leave the house to now that you're remarried? To your son or your stepson?" Baron was furious. He said, "When we divorced, I left with nothing. I gave up all rights to make up for my son. Now, all my assets consist of one house and some savings, accumulated bit by bit after our divorce. My son won't return to China, and I won't rely on him for my retirement. Does he still covet my small amount of property?" His ex-wife was speechless, but before Baron could hang up, she muttered, "I'm sorry." Throughout the phone call, Baron didn't hide anything from me. After he hung up, he was still upset. "Why can't she stand to see me happy? I'm not ambitious, but I've never hindered her from pursuing her future and happiness." I gently stroked his head and comforted him. "We don't need to compare ourselves to her. Our standards of conduct are different." I then shared in detail my history with Albert. He was moved, saying that by confiding in him, I was showing my trust. Indeed, I trusted him completely. Not only I, but my entire family trusted him. Our relationship deepened further, but Baron didn't realize that while he let go of the conversation quickly, it lingered in my mind. Remarriage does bring certain issues. No matter how well he got along with my son, they lacked blood ties. My parents and my son were bound by blood. In our family, he often felt like an outsider. He didn't say anything, but I couldn't help but think about it. How could I make him feel more happy and secure? Chapter 11. I hadn't figured out a solution yet. When Albert heard about my remarriage, he desperately wanted to see me. Driving too fast, he got into an accident and was taken to the hospital, which contacted me. Since meeting me, I had always been his emergency contact. I didn't want to go, but Baron urged me to. He said, when I remarried, my ex-wife came around too. Even though she claimed it was about the house for our son, she had her own unresolved feelings. Albert must be feeling the same. He needs a proper goodbye. Baron said he trusted me. So, I went to the hospital. Fortunately, Albert's car had good safety features. He only had a broken leg and some minor injuries. When he saw me, he immediately cried and asked, "Did you really remarry?" I didn't hide it and nodded. He covered his face and cried. I sat beside him, waiting for him to finish venting. After a long time, he stopped crying, exhausted. Through his sobs, he asked, "Why won't you give me another chance? I truly wouldn't make the same mistake again. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Why won't you give me a chance?" This was his obsession and resentment. I hadn't planned to have an open conversation with him, but seeing him cling to this, it was detrimental to both of us. We had a son, so we couldn't completely sever ties. I organized my thoughts and said, "You know, I wasn't planning to remarry. It's not that I didn't want to, but I was afraid." Recalling those days, I fought back tears. Being married to you was exhausting but also happy. I thought I would always be happy. But then I realized that what I thought was happiness was a joke. I believed I was happy, and I thought you were too. But you weren't happy. Otherwise, why would you look for another woman? His eyes showed guilt and panic, and he hurriedly said, "I was happy with you. I just wasn't content. I wanted to play, to see what other women were like. I never wanted to leave you or our family." I nodded. "I believe you're telling the truth. But now, listen to my truth." He nodded eagerly. This was the first time since his affair that we had a sincere conversation about it. Before, he was desperate to make amends, with no plan, and I just wanted to leave. Now, I was finally willing to talk. I said, "Do you know? Baron was also abandoned. His ex-wife looked down on him for his lack of ambition, but after going out and experiencing the world, she realized his worth. Before she remarried, she regretted it and tried to win Baron back several times. Baron didn't agree. He said he is just an ordinary man who also feels fear and anxiety. He didn't want to be abandoned again. If she could look down on him once, she could do it again. He didn't want to fall into the same pit twice. The first time it hurt. The second time it would be both foolish and painful. This was my nod as well, and my tears flowed uncontrollably. I said to Albert, "The reason I don't give you another chance is the same as Baron's. I am very timid and weak. I can't bear a second betrayal from the same person. You say you won't make the same mistake again, but do you remember? When we got married, you solemnly promised me that even if all the men in the world betrayed their wives, you wouldn't betray me. But you did betray me. Promises from you are not reliable. How can I believe your promises again?" Albert's eyes lost all their light. His shoulders slumped. His face turned ashen. At this moment, he finally understood that there was no possibility between us, because I would never allow myself to fall into the same pit twice. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He kept repeating his apologies. This was the first time since his betrayal that he had apologized to me. Before, he had only asked for forgiveness. This time, he realized he was wrong. Really wrong. He said, "I now understand that not every mistake in this world has a chance for correction. Some mistakes are ones you can never make even once." I nodded approvingly, feeling a sudden urge. I began to tell him things I had never said before. I said, "Do you remember Dr. Zheng, the brilliant surgeon who joined our department 2 months after we got married?" He replied, "You mean the top surgeon in general surgery? That's him." When he first arrived, he didn't know I was married and confessed his feelings to me. I told him I had been married for just over a month, and he was so regretful that he almost wished he could die on the spot. He said he could have joined the hospital 3 months earlier. I told him I was already in a relationship, and coming earlier wouldn't have made a difference. He was unwilling to accept this and tried to convince me that, having just gotten married, I could still get a divorce and be with him, as he believed we were more compatible. We were both medical students, sharing similar experiences and understanding each other better. But I never wavered. Once I chose you, it was you for life. I told him this, and though he was regretful, he could only wish me well. My words shattered the last spark of light in Albert's eyes. The woman he had an affair with was a junior from his alma mater. She had pursued him, and they had a lot to talk about, but he didn't know that I too had been pursued by a fellow student. Yet, in the same situation, I made a different choice. I resisted temptation and upheld our marriage. He accepted temptation and destroyed our marriage. I said, "Not just Dr. Zheng. You know I easily attract others. Over the years, I've had numerous patients who were interested in me, but I was never swayed." His eyes showed a trace of despair. He must have known that in his line of work, there were many clients, and he should understand what it's like to constantly face temptation. I said, "This is the difference between you and me. Frankly, we're not compatible. Divorce is just a way to correct our mistakes and rebuild." This time, I laid it all out. He finally understood that we were not meant to walk the same path together. In the end, I couldn't resist one last jab. "By the way, even though I despise your junior for knowingly being the other woman, you two are quite alike. You might as well marry her." He opened his mouth but had no words. I left. On the way, I received a text from him. "She and I are not alike. I wouldn't dare marry a woman who seduces married men. See, he understands. He just thinks you're a fool." I chuckled. The driver turned to look at me. I apologized, turned off my phone, and closed my eyes to rest. Chapter 12. Baron got along well with my whole family. He said it was fate. Kindness begets kindness. And naturally, good results follow. I wanted to argue that my mom is actually quite picky. My dad has his own issues. And my son, though seemingly innocent, is quite clever. But my mom shot me a look, and I closed my mouth. She reminded me more than once in private that a man like Baron is hard to find. Even in a first marriage, you might not come across someone like him. She told me to hold on to him tightly. He didn't know that for his sake, our whole family was on their best behavior. But they did it willingly. For a good man, it was worth restraining themselves and pretending. And they did pretend. For 4 years. 4 years later, I earned my PhD and was promoted to chief physician. My advisor was very pleased with me. He said, "Well done. Very well done. You should consider your personal life now." As for my personal life, I was happily married to Baron. What else was there to consider? He looked at me, shaking his head and sighing. Stubborn as a mule, I waved my PhD certificate at him, silently refuting his comment. My son got into the university he wanted and pursued the major he loved. Before he left, he said to me, "Mom, I have a girl I like. When I go to university, I'm going to date her." I said, "That's great. If you need money for dating, I'll support you." Seeing that I didn't catch his drift, he continued, "In the future, I'll have my own family and won't have much time to spend with you." I nodded in agreement. "Don't worry, I'm not the kind of mom who would hold you back or interfere in your home to assert my presence." He looked up and sighed like my advisor. "Mom, you're only in your early 40s. Please make an effort and have another child, okay?" My face turned red instantly. Seeing that I understood, he left with his luggage, heading towards his dreams with peace of mind. Actually, I hadn't dared to tell him that I was already carrying a baby. I found out 2 months before my son's college entrance exams, and now I was 4 months along. I had completed the prenatal screening, and the baby was healthy. Baron didn't know either. Recently, he had been mumbling that I might be going through menopause because I wasn't letting him touch me much. He thought I was in a bad mood because of menopause. I just didn't know how to tell him. What kind of shock would it be for a man in his 40s to become a father again? I was afraid he wouldn't be able to handle it. My mom didn't know either. This pregnancy had been almost symptom-free. She just kept reminding me that I seemed to have gained weight and that I shouldn't neglect my body just because I was middle-aged. She was increasingly satisfied with Baron and had given me a strict order: this marriage must not fail. My dad also said we couldn't let Baron re-enter the market. Chapter 13. Speaking of passing things on, it reminded me of Albert. He came to see me again later. This time, he was much more composed. He was also getting remarried. Before his wedding, he wanted to transfer the house and half of his company shares to me. In the future, when our son turned 18, everything would go to him. He said that whatever he created after his remarriage would belong to his new family. In this respect, he was following Baron's example. I happily agreed. As long as it's for my son, I wouldn't mind having more. There was still a trace of longing in his eyes when he looked at me, but I pretended not to notice. His new wife wasn't the junior from his alma mater. She was a young girl who had just graduated from university. She didn't want to face the hardships of life and went straight for an older man. As for that junior, she ended up with nothing. She asked to meet me, but I refused. She then came to our hospital, worried she might affect the patients. I agreed to meet her once. After many years, I finally met the woman who had ruined my first marriage face to face. Previously, I had only seen her in photos on Albert's phone. In her late 20s, she still looked very young. She said, "I don't know why, but I just wanted to see you once. I thought I had one over you, but now I realize I never did." When Albert first slept with me, he was so thrilled. He said he had never felt such joy, and I thought it was something only I could give him. When you divorced, I became even more certain of that. After the divorce, he maintained a relationship with me, but he never mentioned marrying me. I thought I just needed to wait a bit longer. But years passed, and then he married a girl in her 20s. With each sentence, the light in her eyes dimmed a little more. I felt she was seeking some sort of masochistic repentance, but I didn't sympathize. I simply smiled knowingly and told her a harsh truth. Albert is inherently like this. If you could successfully lure him away from his marriage, you should have had this realization. She wiped away her tears and looked at me seriously, asking, "In your eyes, what kind of person is he?" I replied earnestly, "It's twofold. Before his affair, he was a person. The moment he cheated, he became a beast. Trash." She broke down, crying. "So, I was hoping sincerely that a beast would marry me?" I responded mercilessly, "No, He turned into a beast and trash because of you. But deep down, he always had that potential. She cried uncontrollably. I paid the bill and left. Before leaving, I told her, "Don't seek me out again. Albert isn't worth degrading yourself like this." She started crying again as soon as she had stopped. I chuckled inwardly. I noticed the wrinkles around her eyes. In just a few years, though she was only in her early 30s, she had aged significantly. Albert found me undesirable when I was nearing 40. Chapter 14. I was happy on the way back home, but after I got home, I regretted meeting with the mistress. I realized her words had affected me. She told me she could give Albert a better sexual experience. This made me anxious, both with Albert and Baron. In bed, I had always been conventional. I was afraid Baron might have similar thoughts. That night, I initiated intimacy with him. He was overjoyed, but when I tried to explore new ways, he couldn't keep up. Then, amidst his questioning, I burst into tears. I honestly told him about my meeting with the mistress. He sighed and held me tightly. "I like you just the way you are because I am the same. If you were too wild, I wouldn't be able to keep up. It would make me nervous." I breathed a sigh of relief. But afterward, I noticed some bleeding. It scared me. He thought he had hurt me and reassured me that I would be fine in a couple of days. I yelled at him, "What do you mean? Fine in 2 days? We're about to lose our baby, and you're acting so calm?" Only then did he realize I was pregnant. His face turned pale. He quickly took me to the hospital. Fortunately, the baby was fine. He stayed by my bedside, not moving an inch. He was too emotional to speak, full of both love and anger towards me. I felt guilty, burying myself under the covers. My parents arrived, and when they heard I was pregnant and almost lost the baby, they were both shocked and thrilled. My mom quickly took a heart-saving pill. Then she started scolding me in the hospital room. From morning till night, she scolded me so much that even Baron couldn't take it anymore and called a doctor to intervene. Only then did she stop. The ultrasound department head was my master's classmate and secretly told me it was a girl. I told my mom. She gave me a sharp look and then dragged my dad out shopping. They bought a bunch of pink baby items. Baron also started ordering things on his phone, all tiny dresses that made us laugh. 5 months later, I gave birth to a baby girl. She was tiny and incredibly cute. Baron held her in his arms as if he were holding the whole world. My mom was excitedly making a fuss nearby. Since the late stages of my pregnancy, once the baby's safety was assured, my mom stopped holding back and often shouted at both Baron and me. Baron had moments of existential doubt until he realized that his mother-in-law had always been like this. And he calmed down. After our daughter was born, regardless of my mom's behavior, Baron couldn't stop smiling. The first time he became a father, his ex-wife had stripped him of all his parental rights before he could fully experience fatherhood. Now, with our daughter in his arms, he cherished her like his own heart and soul, a precious treasure. When my son came home for vacation and met his little sister, he adored her immensely. He said, "So this is what it feels like to have a sibling without feeling burdened." "It's wonderful," my dad retorted. "That's pretty shallow. Does having a sibling become bad if it feels like a burden?" My son explained that one of his university classmates went home to discover her mother had secretly given birth to a younger brother. Her family wasn't well off, and she was attending school on student loans. Now her mother said that giving her a brother was for her sake, so she would have someone to accompany her, and that she would be responsible for him in the future. His classmate was devastated and applied for an exchange program abroad, likely never to return. Hearing this, my dad felt uneasy. He wanted to criticize the girl but couldn't bring himself to do so. My mom bluntly commented, "You can't blame the girl. It's the parents who are shameless." Baron laughed and said, "Everyone has their own fate." Sensing the tension, my son quickly backtracked, saying that he could be a burden as the eldest. I didn't believe him. Baron didn't believe him either. Baron took our daughter to see his house, which had been empty. It was now rented out. But before renting it, he told our daughter, "Sweetie, this will be your dowry someday." Our daughter yawned and fell asleep. Baron asked me, "Do you think she's dissatisfied with the amount?" I rolled my eyes. "She's just a baby." Baron took it to heart. for our daughter's first birthday. His gift was his appointment notice. He had been promoted to deputy secretary of the party committee at the academy. He said, "A father-in-law still needs some authority to keep the son-in-law in check." My dad was not pleased. He said he had no authority, yet Baron still treated his daughter well, but he quickly fell silent. And I knew he was thinking about Albert. Albert had dared to cheat not just because he was that kind of person, but also because he had weighed the cost of cheating. I was excellent, but my parents were just ordinary folks who looked up to him. In his heart, he didn't place them in an important position. My dad understood everything. He knew that the respect he now received from his son-in-law was because Baron was a good man. He reminded Baron, "Being a deputy director isn't enough. You should aim higher." I thought Baron would argue, but to my surprise, he nodded in agreement and said he should at least aim for a director position. My mom and I exchanged silent looks. We thought their minds were not functioning properly. Wouldn't it be simpler and safer to raise our daughter to be strong herself? Chapter 15. No matter what, life kept getting sweeter. Time seemed to fly by faster and faster. One day, while I was dressing my daughter in a princess dress to take her to a kindergarten performance, I ran into Albert. My son had mentioned that his father had gotten wiser and stopped playing little tricks. The young girl he had previously dated had left him, taking the money from their divorce and finding a younger guy her own age. Albert had remarried, this time to a woman with a child. He was dropping off his stepdaughter at the kindergarten. Seeing my daughter, who looked very much like me, he pressed his lips together, struggling to maintain his composure. I knew what he was thinking. If he hadn't cheated, our daughter would be this age now, perhaps even older. Back then, I had suggested to him that we have a second child. Having only raised a son, I wanted to experience having a daughter. I remember his response clearly. He coldly said, "What are you dreaming of? You're too old to have a healthy child." I didn't say a word. He was right. As a medical professional, I knew that after 35, the quality of a woman's eggs declines sharply, and the risk of having a child with disabilities increases significantly. But I didn't catch the underlying message. In reality, he just thought I was too old. But now, I'm even older, and my husband doesn't mind at all. Our daughter is exceptionally smart and beautiful. My daughter said, "Hello, Uncle. My name is Naomi Lin. My dad is Baron Lin, and my mom is Leona Zhang." Albert's eyes were full of shock. Yes, her dad's last name is Lin, Baron Lin, not Albert Lin. At that moment, all my love and hatred for Albert vanished completely.